Joining us virtually from Abuja this morning is the editor-in-chief of the Daily Courier newspaper, the ever-mercurial Mr. Seun Oni. Hello, good morning to you, Mr. Seun, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mr. Brian. Always a delight to be here.
A pleasure to have you as well. Without further ado, let's pick on the first issue in the news we discussed earlier this morning. It's the heartwarming news that electoral reforms and amendments to the Electoral Act of 2022 are on the way. However, it's with the skepticism that is greeting the news following the proposal by the National Assembly to reschedule the conduct of the 2027 general elections. They are proposing that it be conducted in November of 2026 so as to avoid post-election tribunals and litigations after swearing in. Is this a valid reason for the proposal? And what's your overall view of the electoral reforms that are on the way?
Again, thank you for having me. I think the National Assembly, in my opinion, when I saw that news, are placing the cart before the horse. What Nigerians are actually eagerly waiting for is actually the Electoral Act amendments. Immediately after the 2023 general elections, international monitoring groups, observers, monitors, domestic observers and monitors put together a wide range of an area of issues that require immediate attention. And we are almost 3 years after the elections. We still have those issues still before the National Assembly. The administrative issues, I think that was one of the parting shots of the immediate past INEC chairman who was in the saddle for a decade. They've been able to work on the administrative issues, but in his farewell address, it was quite clear that the National Assembly must rise to the occasion and ensure that areas that require legal tilting, working on an electoral act to ensure that in 2027 we don't have a repeat of some of the issues that blighted our elections. They are still before the National Assembly. And what we expect them to do, and for curious enough, one of the major issues that people actually highlighted is the fact that it should be in our statute books, the Electoral Act, that electoral litigations should be concluded before swearing in of candidates. Those were some of the novel recommendations. This was not done, and the next thing we heard was that the National Assembly are fixing a date for the conduct of the elections. That is not their job. The statutory body saddled with the responsibility of fixing dates for our elections is the Independent National Electoral Commission. The National Assembly, who themselves are parties in the elections, have no right at all to pontificate on when elections should be held and on what ground. What they need to do is to ensure that those areas of recommendations, and they've been widely applauded. For instance, we had 2023 elections, there were people who were arrested, who committed a number of malfeasance during that election. Part of the recommendation is that we must have a separate body who ensures that anyone who commits electoral fraud is dealt with. Because as long as people know that there won't be consequences to their action, there is bound definitely to be a repeat of such shady behavior. And that's what we have seen, especially since our return to democracy in 1999. People have flagrantly gone against the laws of the country, the electoral act, the constitution. We have seen politicians practically take what we call the days of the beavers. All right, take the beavers and ensure that areas where they don't have, possibly they think they don't have the support of the people, they ensure that their talks go to such places and ensure that election is not held in those areas. Police sometimes and the security personnel who are usually handy during these elections usually arrest them. But what happens after the election is that they are left off the hook. So they are in the street again, battle ready, battle hardened, to do the same thing, to repeat the same thing. So it's a circle, the same set of people. And I don't even want to go to the areas of pardon, where people who have been convicted by court by committing heinous act have been granted pardon. So these are the issues. So I really think the National Assembly should go and work on the Electoral Act, make it ready. And of course, you heard the report that was out a few days ago by the technical director to the immediate past chairman of INEC. He came out and it was very clear that except, the National Assembly expedites action with the Electoral Act amendment, we might run into a crisis in the 2027 election. And that's what I think they should give priority, instead of usurping the role of INEC and fixing date for the 2027 election.
Now, Mr. Seun, quite some interesting submissions you have made there. But so that we understand the context of this proposal, because it was captured in a draft for the electoral amendments to the Electoral Act of 2022, as proposed by the committee chairman, Senator Simon Lalong of Plateau State, particularly speaking to section 447, if I'm not mistaken, and he was talking about the election into the office of president and governor of a state should be held not later than 185 days before the expiration of the term of office of the last holder of that office. You've raised salient points on what the focus ought to be in terms of having an independent election petition tribunal, one that punishes electoral offenses. But in terms of this clause, which is now going to be captured into the Electoral Act and by all means will become law, do you think in terms of the functions of the INEC and the National Assembly in fixing the election timetable, there might be a clash in terms of conflicting legislative provisions?
I think that's the point I'm trying to stress, that even in the amended the Electoral Act as we have it now, there have been ample provision given to the commission, in this case now I mean INEC, to, in fact, even with the party primaries, they have a very wide window that we used to have before now. Let me pick, for instance, the Ekiti State election that is not going to happen this year, but activities in preparation, according to the current Electoral Act we have, would have started not, I think we have about 180 days, that's 6-month window to prepare for the election. That's the party primaries, the conduct of primaries, and all the other things that are in between. We saw that with Anambra election that will be conducted in November. But preparations have started several weeks back. Now, that is the duty. That is the rule of INEC. What is that? Immediately after the 2023 election, part of the wide-ranging recommendations by both domestic and foreign observers and election experts is that the same way we have given this, margin, very wide margin for the pre-election preparations, we should also do the same thing post-election so that litigations can be handled. And when litigations are handled, whosoever emerges from the court can be sworn in. It will save us this current trend of senators, governors in a few instances, people in the green chambers and houses of assembly being called back, by the courts due to most times pre-election litigations, sometimes election litigations. After they have been sworn in, they would have received salaries and perks of offices for many months. Then they will be recalled back. So I think there's a unanimous agreement that every litigation, whether it's pre or elections or issues that revolve around the conduct of the election itself, should be resolved before the swearing in. These are the recommendations that everyone is expecting that the National Assembly will expedite, not going ahead and suggesting possible timelines for the conduct of election. Our statute books should handle that, and that's their job. Ensure we have statute books that meet the yearning of all Nigerians. Most of the National Assembly members are not expert in these things. But there are experts who have brought recommendations, who have brought suggestions. Their job is to now look at these recommendations within the ambits of the law, conduct what they call the public hearings, get the buy-ins of Nigerians, and go ahead and pass this Electoral Act amendment so that we have a law. Then you can now leave the institution that is saddled with the responsibility of fixing date, conducting, managing election to do their job, not for legislators to sit in their chambers and suggest possible date for the conduct of election. I think, in my opinion, is really biting more than they can chew. That's really not their duty.
Now, before we move on to another issue in the news, I'd like to highlight that beyond the recommendations which were submitted to the INEC, the European Election Observatory team also visited INEC shortly before Professor Mahmoud Yakubu exited office. INEC alluded, much like you said, that 8 of those points were on administrative issues which they are deliberating on. But besides that, there's also been the Independent Judiciary Accountability Panel, IJAP, that has made recommendations. They believe that if stiffer punishments like disqualifying certain political parties were in place, that a lot of these issues would be better dealt with. And one of those recommendations are that any matters that involves party primaries which are not done in line with the INEC guidelines should warrant disqualification, as has been observed that some persons who do not partake in party primaries still obtain flag bearer tickets coming into an election despite not having been a part of those party primaries. What do you make of such recommendations, and should they be factored in as the National Assembly deliberates on amendments to the Electoral Act of 2022?
The way these things work is that experts can make their recommendation, and that was the final line of thoughts I gave in my last submission. Experts, professors of election planning and management, globally acclaimed consultants when it comes to election management, they can come and make input. But don't forget that these lawmakers are politicians themselves. And I must be very upfront about this. Some of the recommendations actually, in my opinion, don't conform to global best practices. These are politicians. One thing you can be sure of where politics is in place is that you always have diverse or divergent interests. And the major cause of frictions in political parties is that the parties are struggling to come to a middle ground. And it's the same for party primaries. So in the party primaries, let me pick Ekiti, Guba primaries that is in the pipe, that is in the works now. And let me pick the ruling party. 4 people purchased the form. The incumbent governor, two other female and a male purchased the form. They went through the process of screening. In course of the screening, it was discovered that two people did not meet the minimum required criteria set by the party. So two of them initially were given provisional approval pending when the NWC will sit and clear them. The NWC sat and actually withdrew the interim clearance and disqualified two aspirants. You expect them, of course. That's interest. They want to contest. They will go to court. They will drag things. But eventually, the whole process will go on. Sometimes, some of them quickly, in course of the process going, will recall back and just let it go. But some won't. Even after the general elections or the main elections, some issues are still in court. And just to tell our viewers, to educate our viewers, most of the cases that have actually led to the ousting of governors, most of them are usually pre-election cases, and even senators, people in the National Assembly, are pre-election, issues. It was the amendment and some of the pronouncement by the apex court that actually saved us the series of recalls and disruptions in the election process that we have witnessed, because some of their decisions have now been cast in stone. All right. So what we should understand is that it doesn't matter the recommendation any institute, any team can give, you are bringing it to politicians. They understand what happened when it comes to party primaries. So I really don't see that passing. You might go through public hearings and people will say, no, that's what we want, but it will not pass on the floor because they know actually how it works. And it's not a Nigerian issue, it's a global issue. Primaries are usually that are very contentious globally.
All right, Mr. Seun, let's take a listen to the chairman of the Joint Committee on Electoral Reforms in a one-day public hearing conducted in Abuja ahead of the enactment of the Electoral Act of 2025. Senator Simon Lalong is here speaking on the proposed plan of the Joint Committee and other proposals as contained in the draft. Take a listen.
This public hearing is a clear demonstration of the leadership of the National Assembly as well as the Joint Committee to open governance and citizen participation. It is our firm belief that laws that affect the generality of the people must benefit from the input, their experience, and their aspirations.
I might not be able to elaborate on all the areas that we considered for amendments, but I will mention a few which are of interest to the public, such as the early voting, which means that people on essential duties will be able to have a week or two opportunity to vote earlier than the others. Non-compulsory use of PVC has been agitated by the populists. Timeline for elections and election tribunals, which is proposed to be moved from the Constitution to the Electoral Act, although this will still require some constitutional amendments.
The House of Reps Committee Chairman on Electoral Reforms, Honorable Adebayo Balogun, explaining further there, having taken a listen to Senator Simon Lalong's position on the outcome of the one-day public hearing. I'll come back to you now, Mr. Seun. Listening to Honorable Adebayo Balogun, who had talked about some necessary consideration for essential workers to allow for early voting, and the largely controversial non-use of PVC's debate. What do you make of these 2 points as we look to conclude on this discussion?
A brilliant submission, and I think it is one of the most welcome amendments that is expected in the Electoral Act, if eventually it's passed. For some of us who are journalists, security officials, those on essential duties like medical personnel, on election day, it is almost impossible for us to also perform our franchise, even though we have people that we think are qualified, who should get the job done. So because of the exigency of our work on election day, for instance, I'll be maybe in the FCT or in another state covering election duty. So it will be impracticable for me to be able to vote in my polling unit, all right? So if we are giving that allowance, the way it's done in other nations of the world, maybe 2 weeks to the election, we are given the opportunity to also vote. Medical doctors and other people, the security personnel, they can also vote and decide who becomes their leader. And also another very clear submission there that people have been asking for is also the diaspora voting. Since we have a very huge diaspora population, why not also allow them to determine who governs the affairs of the country? So it's an issue. I think virtually everyone had actually said that is one thing we must consider. People on essential duties, journalists, nurses, doctors, military personnel should be able to also vote during the elections.
Next in focus is the planned defection of the Enugu State governor and his caucus, and should I say his cabinet, to the APC from the People's Democratic Party (PDP). He is to be received by the Vice President, Senator Kashim Shettima, the APC National Chairman, Professor Nentawe Yilwata, and the President of the Senate, Senator Godswill Akpabio, amongst other party faithful in Enugu today. Now, I'll come to you, Mr. Seun. It's in a build-up to 2027. As much predicted by the APC, more governors would be defecting into their fold. In your opinion and in your view, what does this make of our democracy and the polity ahead of 2027?
Two questions in one.
Exactly.
What does it say about our politics? And what does it say about 2027? First, about our politics. It just tells you how fluid, how dynamic our politics is in this part of the country. Unlike some more advanced democracies in the world, where ideologies are cast in stone, you don't see people shifting their ideological convictions so easily. It happens, but it's not as frequent and as rampant as we have it in our climate. Just a few days ago, the same governor was, in fact, not just a few days ago, barely 48 hours ago, I saw a poster at the PDP headquarters, and his portrait was adorning the very huge banner at the Wadata Plaza. Himself, his counterpart in Adamawa, they were the two, and the governor of Seun State. They were both facing those places. And so this morning now, if you travel to Enugu, you are going to see the same governor, Peter Mba, holding the broom, and like they do comically, throw away the umbrella. That tells you how dynamic, the shifting nature, how very fluid our politics, our politicians can be. It tells you again that we have not been able, 25 years into politics in this dispensation, we have not been able to really clearly define what our political ideologies are, and is unfortunate. What does it say about 2027 election? To answer that question, we just need to ask ourselves, what was the optics this time during the late President Muhammadu Buhari, just barely 2 years to his desire to run again? What was the picture? Or if we take it a bit back, when President Goodluck Jonathan wanted, indicated interest that he was going to vie for another term, what was the optics. I think if we draw a parallel between these examples I've given, and like I've said a few times on this program, is the fact that 2027 is a no-show for opposition parties. And that's the truth. Forget people say they are ADC, they are ADA, they are third force. The best they can do is spring surprises in a number of states, maybe have some numbers of House of Assembly members, have their foot in the green chambers, and maybe one or two inroads into the green chambers. But when it comes to who occupies the Aso Rock Villa come 2027, the optics are just too bad for the opposition politicians. Because what we are seeing on a daily basis, and like you mentioned, it's not just defecting with members of the state executive committee, it's the campaign with the entire structure of the PDP in the state, except for one senator who had made it very clear that he is not yet defecting. That is not defecting with him. But the senators from Enugu, the House of Representatives from Enugu, we have not seen any one of them come out to say that they will not go with him. That tells you how weakened the PDP, who is the second, or of course, the second dominant political party and the leading, except if what we call fifth of war, except we see it happen. And from what we are seeing, the optics are showing clearly that we might not see that into 2027, when there is a fifth colonies and the house just comes crashing. But without that, and like I said, the chances are remotely almost impossible. But if that happens, we might see a major realignment. But for now, 2027 is actually Uhuru for the incumbent.
Well, Mr. Shewo, there seems to be one person who quite disagrees with you, and it's the governor of Oyo State, His Excellency Seun Makinde. As much as you say it might be a no-show for the opposition, he says he's undeterred by the defections and he believes that Nigerians hold the verdict going into 2027. Do Nigerians really hold that verdict going to the polls? And if there are no more oppositions who are viable enough to unscuttle the APC, do you think that that verdict would hold any sway in any regard?
You don't expect an opposition figure like Governor Seun Makinde to tell you that his party is helpless, his party is actually in the ICU. You don't expect him to say that. He's speaking as a politician. I love calling Nigerian politicians incurable optimists. That's why someone who, in the real sense, cannot win a councillorship slot will throw in millions and billions of naira to vie for gubernatorial ticket. It's just in the DNA of politicians. Having said that, Nigerians, the trajectory of Nigerian election is such that on election day, and except that changes, of course, the percentage of people who voted in the last election tells you that we still have less than 25% of Nigerians coming out on election day to vote. The question everyone should ask, where are the remaining 75%? On election day, what we've noticed is that those of us who blow the big grammars, all right, those of us who use the Twitter, who are visible everywhere, doing all the talks. On election day, we on our television and we want to follow the trend across the country. I'm telling you, trend studies, what it has shown on election day across the country. The folks who go and queue up and line up to perform their civil duty, they are guys that listen to gatekeepers. Who are the gatekeepers? The governors. Who are the gatekeepers? The senators. Who are the gatekeepers? Politicians across the various places. So when you say Nigerians will speak, unfortunately, the trend in Nigeria shows that Nigerians speak through these gatekeepers. And so they already know what will make people buy into the direction they want to go. For some, it is cash. Sometimes as low as 1,000, people will follow those gatekeepers. For some, it's macaroni, spaghetti, people will follow them. So, except those of us in the 75 percentile who cannot be swayed by 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 upper limit, spaghetti, macaroni, rice, and beans, except we start coming out on election day to make our voices count. All the idea of Nigerians we speak that I hear by some of these folks is just laughable, because as a journalist on election duty, I don't see people matching their conviction with their action, and it's sad.
Well, quite interesting takes there. Let's also look at your newspaper now, talking about what might influence the voting patterns as it concerns the economic well-being of many Nigerians. Now, citizens are reportedly, by your publication, demanding transparency in the disbursement of over 300 billion naira to 8.1 million households through the federal government's conditional cash transfer program. Give us insight into this headline story and the position of most Nigerians in that regard.
Is one of the downside of the President Enugu administration. And I hope the president and some of the people who are in the position of policy making can listen very well to the yearnings, not just of Nigerians, consistently for the past 2 years plus now. International organizations like the IMF and the World Bank have also held the same position, that on one hand, the economic policies of the government seems to be best fit, best suited for our current situation. Let me borrow the exact words of the CBN governor while he was in London a few days ago. The priority should be to stabilize the economy before they now change gear to start talking about growth and eventually development. And that is the right policy trajectory. You stabilize the economy. As a nation, we're going to a point where we were servicing debt with 96% of our earnings. You have to take us from there, and we are glad we are no longer there. We are below 40%. We're in a place where our inflation was running riot, the prices of goods were skyrocketing, our unemployment figures were going south, and we've been able to stabilize for over 2 years. But what is the unintended consequence of focusing on stabilizing these metrics is the fact that you are going to affect the poorest of the poor. So before now, we usually divide Nigerians into three: the rich, the bourgeois. We have some folks we call the middle class, and we have people who you call the low class. But what had happened in a few years, beginning with the Buhari administration of 8 years, and the past almost 3 years now, so 11 years cumulative, is that we have succeeded by our stabilizing policy orientation to wipe off the middle cadre. So you only have the bourgeois, the guys who can afford to travel to Qatar on a weekend and spend millions without knowing they spent anything. You now have the lower class, the folks struggling to think about how to eat the next food. And even though they are paid salary, the minimum wage of 70,000, that 70,000 cannot feed them for 2 weeks. You have that lower class. So the IMF, the World Bank, and everyone across the country, virtually every financial expert I know in this country have said that you must find a way to now, help those people who are now down to nothing. This administration had not fared well in that area. So what we found on our hands is that the minister comes out and he says that the government has spent XYZ billion. So in this case, the Minister of State in the humanitarian affairs came and he announced that the 300 billion has been sent to that number of households in the country. It immediately generated alarm across the length and breadth of the country, because you now begin to ask yourself, who are the beneficiaries of this cash? Are we return ourselves back to the days of the days in this country where we had some interventions to the poorest of the poor, and it was discovered that it's just party stalwarts who send their accounts, and from the FCT here, they ferry money to gatekeepers, party chieftains, across the 774 local governments in this nation. In fact, I know a particular person in my area where it was that empowerment that he uses practically all his family members. Monthly, he places them on salary. I mean, someone who is already doing very well. He now places his children, his cousins, his nephews, and people who are poor really did not benefit anything. But Buhari came and launched what we call the Empower. I really don't think you can meet 20 persons in Nigeria and you ask them what is Empower, and they will tell you they don't know. Because we know the people who are benefiting monthly from the conditional cash transfer. When they now went into bringing graduates and unemployed people with skill sets, and they send them to medical centers and a number of places, we know them. At least you will have somebody in your town, somebody in your local government, if you don't have somebody in your family who is a beneficiary. But this one, Nigerians have said is audio money, because every time they say they spend XYZ billions, and you don't know who is collecting it. So who is fooling who? In fact, you can even still pardon the immediate administration. At least they go to the market, even though they carry cameras. But you see those women excited that they have received 20,000 there. But this one, nobody is saying who is collecting anything. But every month, ministers come out and they tell us there's a conditional cash transfer. The IMF has been screaming. The World Bank has screamed about this in their quarterly briefing. This is one issue they always highlight, and the government is not changing in its direction.
Now, Mr. Seun, how do we achieve transparency? I've seen a couple of recommendations that the social register needs to be made electronic and accessible to all Nigerians so as to verify the true beneficiaries. Do you support this notion, and how can the government achieve it?
I think the security of the people involved in this thing, we can protect it. I don't have issue about that. But we should be able to have a fair way of knowing who got what. At least we need the beneficiaries of Empower at the time, like I mentioned. Why is it that this conditional cash transfer, we don't know the people who are benefited?
But in closing, because we have a little less than 5 minutes with Mr. Seun, I would like to pose my next question. Mr. Seun, whilst Nigerians grapple with the current economic realities, in the light and reality of the World Bank's a report that 139 million Nigerians are currently in multi-dimensional poverty, is also a price hike experienced in cooking gas, liquefied petroleum gas, for those who might not know it, has also skyrocketed with a 48% price increment. It used to sell on the average between 1,100 naira per liter per kilogram to 2,200 naira per kilogram. Now, this morning we're hearing that the federal government has ordered NMDPRA to intensify depot monitorings to check hoarding. This statement was released by the Minister of State for Gas, Honorable Ekperikpe Ekpo through his spokesperson, Louis Iba, on Monday. What do you make of this development, and can the NMDPRA really salvage the situation through depot monitoring?
Unfortunately, I don't expect a presidential directive before an institution as that goes to work. Initially, we were told it was occasioned by Pengassin strike. That was why we had a disproportionate hike in the price of gas. Just a day before, I bought at 1,000 per kg, and the following day when the strike came up, somebody went and told me it's now sold for 1,400, and from there it was just going nuts. It's unfortunate, and I think something drastic has to happen. Our middleman system in Nigeria, I know, is a major business headache globally, but the government must still find a way, like I usually submit. We have not come out to say we are the extreme capitalism economy. We have always prided ourselves. I studied economics of my first degree, and we've always prided ourselves as a nation that is mixed economy. What that means is that there is a measure of government intervention that is acceptable in order to get some semblance of sanity in the country. And that's where institutions like the people in the oil and gas sector, they have to up their ante and ensure that Nigerians don't suffer from the greed of a few people who are usually referred to as the middlemen. I really don't see any reason that 2 weeks after that strike issue that we have still not been able to return the price of gas to what it ought to be, even though reports have shown that it's not a direct increase in the price of gas from the suppliers. In fact, what we learned was that Dangote, a few days later, actually reduced the price of gas. And so you expect that to reflect at least a week in the not saying that. So the government agencies who are saddled with this responsibility really don't need a presidential directive. They should have their men everywhere and ensure that the right thing is done so that Nigerians will not pay the price of these greedy middlemen.
Well, thank you for your submissions, Mr. Seun Oni. We appreciate you for taking our time to discuss the issues in the news with us this morning. We're wishing you the best of the rest of your day ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a delight, and please have a beautiful day ahead too.
Thank you very much, sir.